Welcome everyone to Wondering Jew, Rav Ginsburgh's blog and Twitter account from 15 years ago that we've been doing. I always show the cover, The Wondering Jew. And today we have one or two new subjects. The first one is called Tips for a Better Life. As I mentioned a number of times that some of Rav Ginsburgh's teachings from this book have a bit of humor in them. He's really appealing to the widest audience possible. He is giving over very deep and profound ideas, but in very, very simple and short messages. So the first one, for those who have the book, we're on page 107. And again, it's called Tips for a Better Life. So he says that it will sound like just very plain, but there's something very deep in it. He says, to be wise is to take the best advantage of every opportunity. That's what being wise is. So usually everything that he's saying, there's a lot of material behind it. And so one of my favorite teachings from the Baal Shem Tov is very connected to this. Now, we usually think of the Baal Shem Tov as a wonder worker, a miracle worker, someone whose head was in heaven, in the clouds, in deep spiritual matters, which is all true. But one of the greatest things that the Baal Shem Tov said is a person needs to be smart. That's all he said. A person needs to be smart. So this is very much what Rav Ginsburgh just said. To be wise is to take the best advantage of every opportunity. In other words, no matter how much you have your head in the clouds, we live in a very material, physical, practical world. And so when opportunity knocks, you have to be smart to know when to move, when to take advantage of every opportunity. As we said before, these came from tweets. And now a tweet can be longer, but in those days it was really one sentence, maybe two sentences. That was like it. So Rav Ginsburgh, in just a few words, is really saying this idea that no matter how spiritual one thinks that they are, we still live in a very practical, down-to-earth world. And so we have to be smart. Okay, the next one is called The Rope of Hope. It rhymes. So he says, we live in a generation of hope. Hope that all our children grow up to become good, contributing people. It all depends on education, on Torah. In Hebrew, hope, meaning the word hope, is tikva. And that word comes from the word line, kuf vav. So let me explain. Tikva is taf, kuf, vav, hey. So the middle letters is kuf vav, which is the word for a line. So Rav Ginsburgh says, hope creates a line, a vector force, a ray of light that permeates the dark vacuum of life. So what he's referring to, this should ring bells in people's Kabbalistic brains, the idea that when God wanted to create the world. This is the teaching from the Arizal. I think almost everyone's heard this many times, that in order to make space, a place for a finite world that would have at least the appearance of being somewhat separate from God, is God contracted his infinite light and created an empty space, a vacuum. And into the vacuum, he shone a ray of light. This ray of light is really what is now called the Big Bang. And from that, all of creation, all of existence comes. So Rav Ginsburgh is alluding to this here. So I'll read it again. In Hebrew, the word for hope is tikva, which comes from the word line, kav. Hope creates a line, a vector force, a ray of light that permeates the dark vacuum of life. So in other words, he's taking call it Torah cosmology, and he's applying it to each and every person, that when we have hope, it's like a ray of light in a somewhat dark world. Hope is the rope that connects the purely spiritual origin of the soul in heaven to the soul's manifestation in the physical body. So here again, in this one sentence, he is alluding to the idea that our souls come from a heavenly abode into a physical body, and that hope is what connects the soul and the body in this world to the root of the soul in heaven. We've learned many times that not the entire soul comes into the body. The soul is always connected to its source, its root in the upper worlds. A tzaddik, a righteous person, a holy person, a pure person, is someone who can draw down into this body more and more of the actual soul. And so Rav Ginsburgh is saying is hope is like the connection that allows us to keep connected to the source of our soul. And then Rav Ginsburgh brings, a famous saying. It comes from one of the Chabad Rebbes, the Rebbe Maharash. So he says a Hasidic adage, a saying is, don't crawl under obstacles, just hop over them. With hope, we hop over obstacles. So the Rebbe Maharash said, it's probably the most famous thing that he said, is that when a person has obstacles, that sometimes we think, well, maybe we'll dig underneath, maybe we'll try to go around. And the Rebbe Maharash said, Latchila ariber, meaning in the first instance, jump over it. Don't try to go under. It's a little bit too hard. Don't try to go around. If the obstacle could last for 500 miles, jump over it. So that's what Rav Ginsburgh is bringing here, is that hope is this rope, is this line that helps us jump over any obstacle by connecting us to our root soul. So he finishes this little piece saying, hope and be happy, certain that what you hope for will come true. In other words, it's good to have dreams, and it's good to be happy about your dreams because you have to have a certain confidence that you will accomplish your dreams. Hope and be happy, certain that what you hope for will come true. So, in other words, hope is like a ray of light in the darkness Without hope, I think everyone can imagine on a personal level, if someone is without hope, they become helpless because they have no inspiration to do anything, because they're not confident they'll be able to accomplish anything. So you have to be able to have hope. And again, hope comes from the word kav, tikva. The next one is called might and joy. So he quotes a pasuk, might and joy are in his place. Oz v'chedva bimkomo. Strength and joy are in his place. Talking about God, of course. To be together with God in his place, one must experience might and joy simultaneously. So in other words, when it says might and joy is in his place, so if we want to be connected to God, we want to be, as it were, in his place, then we have to have strength, might, and joy. Might is the pulse of the heart. Joy is breath. Pulse and breath are the two basic dynamics of life. With a mighty heart, breathe joy. That will take you to the place of God, a place above space, in a time above time. Well, we have to unpack this one. So let's go back. Might is the pulse of the heart. Joy is breath. So in the dynamic called run and return, ratzov v'shov, this dynamic that runs through all creation. But in the body, it is the heartbeat, which manifests in the pulse, and in breath. We breathe in and out, ratzo v'shov, ratzo v'shov. And so the basic dynamic of ratzo v'shov manifests in the tides, in the waxing and waning of the moon, in electricity, AC, DC, in the pulsation of every cell, every atom. But here he's connecting this idea that with a mighty heart, breathe joy. So we know that in Eastern meditation, Eastern religions, but also very, very much in Judaism, breathing is a very, very important part of any meditation. And when we say meditation, we're not necessarily talking about an hour or half an hour. We're just talking about being aware of your breath, and especially if you're in stress, how important it is to just slow down and just breathe. Everyone knows that expression. Just stop and breathe. Because when we're uptight, quite literally, our breath becomes shortened. So what's interesting is in the verse that Rav Ginsburgh is quoting from is Oz v'chedva bimkomo, strength and joy. So you can see this on YouTube. I believe it's still on YouTube. Many, many, many years ago, Rav Ginsburgh created a breathing technique called chedva, this word for joy, where one would, the letters of chedva are chet, daled, vav, and hey. Chet, daled, vav, and hey. So he would say one should literally, as he said, with a mighty heart, breathe joy. So his model for breathing was breathe in for a count of 8, which is the first letter of chedva, joy. Hold it for a count of 4. Breathe out for a count of 6, and then relax for a count of 5. At a certain point, it becomes natural. At first, you need to concentrate to do this, but this was a method that he used to literally manifest this idea of, with a mighty heart, breathe joy. You're literally breathing chedva according to the numerical counts of your breath. Many people, because chedva is very close to the 4 letters of God's name, a yud and a hey and a vav and a hey. They're very, very, very close. And so many people adopt the same idea and meditate and breathe to the 4 letters of God's name. So Rav Ginsburgh continues, might, the word for might in Hebrew is oz, and joy, as we've said, is chedva. When you add them together, it equals 100. Oz is 76, and chedva, 77, and chedva is 23. So when you add them together, it equals 100. And Rav Ginsburgh says a perfect square number that also equals the word for beauty, yofi. So anytime you have a square number, 100 is the square of 10. So we know how important the number 10 is in Jewish thought. So he's just pointing out that strength and joy equal 100, 10 squared, and it equals beauty. In other words, there's something beautiful about combining strength and joy, the heart and breath. So then he says, might and joy, this is really what we just said, correspond to the first 2 letters of God's name, a yud and a hey. So in other words, from a chet to a yud is just 2 beats, and from a daled to a hey is 1 beat. So he says, again, in a meditation, that might and joy are like the first 2 letters of God's name. The second 2 letters, the vav and the hey, correspond to compassion and humility. Now, why is that? Is because the number 6, yud and hey, and then vav, represents what's called zer anpin, the lower 6 sfirot, and the middle one is tiferet, and tiferet is compassion. And the last hey of God's name is connected to humility. So he says, might and joy are gifts that God gives the humble and compassionate. So this is just a very, very beautiful connection that he's making to God's name here. That the yud is strength, the hey is joy, the vav is compassion, and the hey is humbleness. And then he puts it together, is that those who are compassionate and humble, they will merit to have strength and be joyous. Now, like any of these teachings, we have to really contemplate on them and meditate on them, and then actually try to put them into action. So now he says, before we took the words oz and chedva, strength and joy. Now, if we add compassion and humility, which in Hebrew are rachamim and anava, so he says all 4 of those words together equals 529, which is 23 squared. And remember, chedva is 23. So when joy is squared, it equals 529, which equals ta'anug, pleasure. Now, I hope some of you are writing this down because it's a lot to remember. But these are very, very potent meditations. And when I mean meditation, I mean contemplation. So if you take just this idea of like a true manifestation of joy, that's what 23 squared means. Chedva squared, joy squared, that is ta'anug. And if you remember from our series about the Sfirot, ta'anug is in the highest level of Keter. That's why on Shabbat, the bliss of Shabbat is called ta'anug. The pleasure of Shabbat is called ta'anug. So that combines the joy of Shabbos with the pleasure of Shabbos. Usually when we talk about joy, it relates to the holidays. And when we talk about Shabbat, it's usually ta'anug, pleasure. But of course, they're related. So on holidays, of course, we have pleasure, but the main emphasis is the experience of joy. Whereas in Shabbat, of course, we have joy, but the main experience is ta'anug, pleasure. So we covered a lot in this one, I have to admit. And again, as you know, we repost the classes. You can listen to it again. And of course, some of you probably are taking notes and it will be easier. And some of you have the book, which we have definitely encouraged everyone to get the book because we're going to be doing this book for a long time. Okay. So now, this goes back to the first thing that we said today when Rav Ginsburgh, I filled in this idea that the Baal Shem Tov said, you have to be smart in this world. So this is somewhat connected. So this is called take it easy, work hard. So you might think, whoa, that sounds contradictory. So he says like this, some things are easy, others are hard. The hard things present more of a challenge than the easy ones. Reach a balance between easy and hard. Now, this again is really based on a very important teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, where he said that we should act in this world zrizut b'metinut. Zrizut b'metinut. Zrizut means with alacrity. We should move. We should act. We should be assertive. B'metinut means in a calm way. So it sounds like a little bit of a contradiction, but that's exactly what the Baal Shem was trying to say, is it shouldn't be a contradiction, that one could act forcefully, assertively, even quickly, and still maintain a calm inner peace. So that's what Rav Ginsburgh says, reach a balance between easy and hard. Easy describes the experience of natural flow from on high to below. So in other words, when things are easy, our concept is like it's flowing from above to below. In this, what we're doing in this world, we have divine assistance. It's just flowing. Hard is what it's like to climb upwards, facing and overcoming obstacles from below to above. Now, hard, by the way, is not bad. In other words, this is not good and bad. But some things are easier to do, some things are harder. When they're harder, the experience is we're going from below to above. In rabbinical Hebrew, the words for easy and hard are respectfully light and heavy. So he says that the word that is used often for if something is easy means it's kal. It's light. It's easy to do. It's light. And the word for hard is heavy. Kaved. It's heavy. Now the word kaved is actually 26, the numerical value, which is the name of Hashem. So he says the word for easy is kal, equals 130. Heavy is 26. So he says, since 130 is 5 times 26, that means that 1 easy equals 5 hards. Here he's, again, it's a bit humorous, but he's trying to say is the experience of something that is hard is like 5 times harder than something that is easy. So he says, easy plus hard, kal and kaved, 130 and 26 is equals 156, the numerical value of Yosef. Yosef possessed the proper balance between easy and hard in his life. So again, it sounds like he's saying very simple things, but everything he's saying is based on much, much deeper ideas. Because if you look at the life of Yosef, so he's sold by his brothers. He ends up in jail for 12 years. So he was a slave in Egypt. So we would say he had a hard life. But a number of times it says in the text that whatever Yosef did, he succeeded. Whatever he did, whatever he touched, just flowed. He turned everything into a success. So that's what Rav Ginsburgh is saying here, is that Yosef possessed the proper balance between easy and hard in his life. Very deep thing. Now, he doesn't mention this, but we should, that 156 also equals Zion, Zion, Zionism, Zion v'Yerushalayim. And so even in the Hatikva, Zion v'Yerushalayim. And so we see it played out daily. Life in Israel is not easy, as simple as it is, and yet sometimes it flows so easily. Like, put it this way, Shabbos in Eretz Yisrael is not like Shabbos anyplace else. It just flows. It's easy. On the other hand, life in Israel can be very challenging, very difficult. So again, it's the same. Sion and Yosef are the same gematria. So Rav Ginsburgh finishes this piece saying, sometimes the tzaddik does the work for his chassid. Then things come easy. So in other words, sometimes when it comes to spiritual work, a person is connected to a tzaddik, a rebbe, a rebbitzin, a spiritual guide, and they help make things easy for a person, especially if they're having a hard time with life in general. A tzaddik can help someone and make it easy. But look what Rav Ginsburgh says. But it is better that the tzaddik encourages you to do the work yourself. In other words, there's the danger of becoming over-connected or over-dependent on one's spiritual guide. And so Rav Ginsburgh says sometimes we need that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what he's saying is that it's better when the tzaddik helps you by encouraging you to do the spiritual work yourself. Because ultimately we have to. No one can really do it for us. We could get like a fix. We can get a shot to make life easier. But ultimately, we have to figure it out ourselves. So Rav Ginsburgh finishes and says, take it easy and feel God at work, but work hard yourself. Again, he's really trying to capture deep ideas in just a few words. Take it easy and feel God at work, but work hard yourself. In other words, obviously we're dependent on God. Just like we might go to a Rebbe or a spiritual guide or a Rebbitzin or a Mashpia for help. And it's perfectly legitimate. But here he's saying that we depend on God. So he says, feel God working for us, but make sure you do the work yourself. Okay. The next one is called homeostasis. Hope I said that right. Homeostasis. The primordial world of chaos was unstable and shattered. This is what's called the breaking of the vessels, the shattering of the vessels. And this was in the previous world, the world of chaos, Olam HaTohu. Our world maintains a state of homeostasis, which means keeping things in balance. So in the previous world, the lights were so tremendously powerful, they shattered the vessels. The vessels could not hold the light. So this world is more balanced. Not for everyone, by the way, but hopefully it's more balanced. Homeostasis means keeping our internal world relatively constant, while on the outside we continue to undergo changes. So this is very much like we said before from the Baal Shem Tov. Zrizut b'metinut. In other words, on the outside, we need to act in the world. But on the inside, we need to keep our internal world relatively constant. So then he asks, how can I maintain this balance? I place God before me always. That's how we can keep our balance. Knowing that God is involved in our life, God is ever present, that helps us both act assertively in this world and to do it with a certain amount of calmness and inner peace. Okay, now we're going to page 110. This is called Hint Book. The sages say a wise person learns from a hint. A fool learns from a fist. This is a saying in the Gemara. A wise man learns from a hint. A fool learns from a fist. So this is connected to language. So he explains, because this saying in the Gemara is in Aramaic. So he says in Aramaic, Hebrew's sister tongue, in which the saying was expressed, the word for hint is remizah, remez, remizah. And fist is kurmizah, and it rhymes. Remizah, kurmizah. They're a pun or a play on words. In English, one could say, if you don't get the pun, you might get a punch. I think he made this up, and it's a very good play on words. If you don't get the pun, if you don't get the hint, you might get a punch, you might get a fist. So now what he says is very, very deep and relevant to all of us. God is always hinting to us whether or not to embark on a path that we desire. A wise person is sensitive to God's hints. But there are different types of wise people, different types of hints, and different manners of how to interpret hints. Sometimes the hint poses a question mark as to the advisability of making a certain decision, of following a certain path. Sometimes the hint says, go ahead, but tread carefully. Sometimes the hint says, first understand the subtleties of the hint itself, and then you'll know what to do. Now he connects this to Torah learning. We're going to go back over this because what he's saying here is so relevant to how we make decisions. So Rav Ginsburgh says there are 4 levels of learning Torah: Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod. Pshat means the simple, literal storyline. Remez, that's what we're talking about. Remez means a hint, an allusion to something else that is connected to what we're learning. Drush is the metaphoric, allegoric, symbolic type of learning. And Sod is the mystical, spiritual type of learning. So he says there are 4 levels to learning Torah. One of them, Remez, means hint. Read and contemplate the eternal truths of the Torah. Be attentive to their inherent hints. They are addressing you here and now. In other words, the learning the Torah on the level of Remez basically means make sure that you don't just read the superficial storyline and that's all you think is happening. The Torah is full of hints. Now, some of you may have my book, called 70 Faces. That's what the whole book is about. How is the Torah hinting to us? There's a big letter in a word. There's a small letter in a word. There's a letter seemingly missing in a word. There's a word that has an extra letter. There's a word that has a dot over it. There is the way we sing the Torah. There are the shapes of the letters. There are the numbers of the letters. There's a juxtaposition of words. There are acronyms. And it goes on. There are like 70, I bring 70 different methods of finding the hints in the Torah. So that's what he's saying here is, first he says, God is always hinting to us whether or not to embark on a path that we desire. So in other words, let's say we want to do something. So Rav Ginsburgh is saying that if we're attentive enough, and we're not always attentive, that's part of the problem, that if we're attentive enough, then there'll be hints whether we should go forward or not. But again, as Rav Ginsburgh said, there are different types of people, there are different types of hints, and we have to match them up. Now, I'm going to tell very quickly a story that I've told before, but this is the perfect time. So if you've heard it before, hopefully this will help you remember, is that one time I asked Reb Shlomo this very, very question, that when a person wants to accomplish something, they set out to do something. Obviously, they think it's important, worth doing, and they start doing it. And then all kinds of obstacles come. And the question is, there's two ways to interpret this. And you can see different teachers teach kind of like opposite ways. Some say, look carefully, because maybe God is just telling you, it's just, maybe not now. Maybe this wasn't the wisest choice. Maybe you shouldn't go forward. Or when we get obstacles, it means that what we're trying to accomplish is so good, of course there's going to be opposition. That's the way the world works. So getting opposition should strengthen you to go forward. The question is, how do you know what the hint is telling you? The obstacle. Is it telling you to stop? Or is it telling you, no, you just have to get through the obstacle. I'm not supposed to stop. Or we're really being told, stop. So I once asked Reb Shlomo, and he really, really thought about this. And what he told me was, for this answer, you have to have prophecy or divine inspiration. And to have divine inspiration, you have to pray for it. So it sounds like a very simple answer, but it's really, really an important and deep answer. In other words, sometimes it's really hard to tell. And the only way you can really figure it out is to pray for that the meaning of the hint is revealed to you. That you pray for divine guidance. So this is what Rav Ginsburgh is saying here. He says, and I'll just say it again, God is always hinting to us whether or not to embark on a path that we desire. A wise person is sensitive to God's hints. But even if you're sensitive to God's hints, the way we become sensitive is through prayer. That is what helps us get the clarity to know how to proceed. In other words, obstacles are not bad per se. Everything has challenges. What in life doesn't have some kind of a challenge? As we learned before, there are easy challenges, relatively, and much harder challenges. But it doesn't mean that we have to abandon everything that we do as soon as we have a challenge. And then he connects it to the Torah, which is very, very important. The Torah is hinting to us all the time things that are relative to our life. This is what's called living with the times. The Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, said every week we should look in the Torah portion, or if there's a holiday coming up, and look, and then see it reflected in your own life, and in the life of and the world in general. Okay, so there's one more in this section, and it's called Never Give Up. So Reb Zusha of Anipoli, very, very famous Hasidic Rebbe, very colorful, many, many stories about Reb Zusha and his brother, who was also very famous, Rebbe Elimelech. So he taught that you should learn from everyone, even from a thief. So this is actually really not Reb Zusha's. It's in Pirkei Avot. It says, who is the wise person? The one who learns from every person. And the Gemara comments on this, even from an evil person. Even from an evil person, there is what to learn. So in this case, Reb Zusha said, even from a thief, you can learn something. So what can you learn from a thief? So he said, one of the things to learn from a thief is that if you don't succeed the first time, keep on trying. That though it's not written in stone, but many people who are thieves, even after they get caught, even many times when they go to jail, they go right back to it. So here, obviously, that's not a positive thing. But Reb Zusha is saying, even from a thief who won't change their ways, you can learn something. But it's really the sages said this, is that we should learn from every person. And I'll finish this and I'll tell a story. If something is really important to me, even if I fail time after time, I must keep on trying. Failure is a trial. God is testing me. A Jew never gives up. We're here to bring Mashiach. We will settle for nothing less. Very, very powerful words. So I'm going to tell two things. Again, I've told this story before. The short one is that one of my very, very good friends, Michael Golem, Alav Shalom, who passed away about 10 years ago. So he was the gabbai in our shul. And so when people were called up to the Torah, he would give them blessings. In most shuls, you have a standard blessing that everyone gets, and that's it. He would he would expand sometimes in great length. Everyone got like a personal blessing, even people he didn't know. He just tuned in and gave people blessings. And one of the things he used to say all the time, and he said it with great enthusiasm. He said, never, ever, ever, ever give up. Never, ever, ever give up. It's really based on a famous saying of Rabbi Nachman, who said, Ein yeush ba'olam. There is no such thing as giving up in this world, or being hopeless or helpless. There is no such thing. So the other story I want to tell you is very directed to this. And it's an interesting story. In one of my many lecture tours, I spoke, I wish I remember the name of it. It was the biggest shul on the west side of New York. West side of New York, Upper West Side is very, very Jewish. Many, many shuls. That's where Reb Shlomo's shul is. But there was one shul that was huge, and around 1,000 people came Friday night. And I remember before I spoke, I was told you can't say your Devar Torah, you have to scream it. The place was so huge. You had to like really talk loud for anyone to hear you. But I remember it was the parsha about Nadav and Avihu. Nadav and Avihu on the day of the inauguration of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, without having permission. They were just very, very passionate, and they took incense and put it on coals from the altar, and they went into the Holy of Holies, and their souls were consumed. And so the sages discuss all the many different things that they possibly did wrong to deserve that their souls would be taken from them. But on the other hand, it's recognized that something very, very positive about what they did was their passion. So I remember, this is going back like 20, 25 years ago. This was during the Intifada. The Intifada, this is the second Intifada, which was from approximately the year 2000 to 2002. Lasted for over 2 years. This was all the bus bombings and cafe bombing. It was just a terrible, terrible period. And I remember saying, I'm telling the story because I brought this idea that we have to learn from everyone, even our enemies. And what I said was that we're not just in a physical battle between us and our enemies. It's also a spiritual battle. And I said one thing we can learn from our enemies, they are very, very passionate in their, of course, it's a terrible thing for us. They are very passionate in their desire to destroy us. So much so, because most of these bombings were suicide bombings. So much so that they're willing to give their life for their cause. And I remember saying that if we're going to win, and I hold this to this day, if we're going to win and be victorious over those who want to destroy us, our passion, our belief system has to be greater than their willingness to die for their cause. It has to be greater. That's the only way we are going to defeat this kind of evil that is bent on destroying us. Nothing short of our spiritually being able to kind of ante up against this kind of evil is going to be able to allow us to be ultimately victorious. So that's basically learning from here that, like the sages say, we have to learn from everyone, even from our enemies. So I'm looking at the time, and I think this is a good place to stop because we finished that section. And next we start a pretty long section called Torah and Commandments. So this is going to be really, really great. We're going to learn all about different aspects of Torah and the commandments. But I think I'd rather just start it next session. So let's end with a blessing, like we usually do, that we're all passionate about what we want to accomplish in this lifetime. And in fact, probably that's the only way any of us will be able to accomplish what we want to. We need that passion. We need that commitment. We need that seriousness We need that what we learned today. Oz v'chedva, strength and joy. So I bless everyone with strength and joy to accomplish what we have to do as individuals and as part of Israel, and I include all lovers of Israel, that we have to bring Mashiach. Like Rav Ginsburgh said, he said, a Jew never gives up. We're here to bring Mashiach. We will settle for nothing less. May we never settle for anything less.